if you're into Civil War history and you hear the term salient or Gettysburg, your mind probably goes to the famed Dan Sickles salient on day 2 of the battle here at Gettysburg. Terms like the wheat field, the peach orchard, Devil's Den, names like that will forever be ingrained in American history. Well, what if I told you that there was another salient on the first day of the battle, and that took place right here. We're in Barlow's Knoll, and we're going to explore the Barlow salient here on the north end of Gettysburg. And we're going to see if the results here would be different, or if this salient would have the same outcome as the Sickles salient. So I just want to orient you as to where we are here. We are on the north end of the town of Gettysburg here, and you can see where we are, Barlow's Knoll. This would have been called Blocher's Knoll before and during the battle. And you can see Barlow would position his forces here in a salient or a protrusion from the Union line. I believe his original orders were to form up closer to town, but he saw the high ground here, much like Sickles did on day 2, and he positioned his men along this ridge here, and he would have skirmishers out front near Rock Creek. All right, so this is Francis Channing Barlow, and outside of positioning his men in every Civil War enthusiast's favorite word, a salient, he actually had a few other things in common with old Dan Sickles. Both were from New York. Both were lawyers, and both were involved in politics in some form or fashion. Both would join the Army with little to no military experience, and both men would command men on the field of battle here. Barlow would actually distinguish himself at the Battle of Antietam, and him and his men would capture a number of Confederate prisoners during Antietam at the Bloody Lane. Barlow would actually be wounded at the Battle of Antietam. I believe an artillery round, or shrapnel from an artillery round, would strike him in the face. But Barlow would make a full recovery, and he would be transferred to the 11th Corps. And this is the area where the 11th Corps soldiers would be positioned, just north of Gettysburg. Now, unfortunately for the men of the 11th Corps, they were the ones that were involved in Jackson's famous flank attack. And from then on, these men carried an unfair stigma about them. Anywhere they went, they were the men who fled and were decimated by Jackson's attack at Chancellorsville. Well, when Barlow was transferred to this corps shortly before the Battle of Gettysburg, I believe he was put in charge of a division. Either way, he was very unhappy about it. He didn't like his men didn't like him, and I don't know about you, but that doesn't spell a recipe for success to me, especially when your men's lives depend on the decisions you make in the field of battle. But yeah, so here we are. This is Barlow's Knoll, which would have been called Blocher's Knoll. Now, I wasn't anticipating the tallest corn in the world being here, but straight ahead, looking north, the terrain kind of slopes down gradually towards what is called Rock Creek. And Barlow would place skirmishers from the 54th New York along Rock Creek, and despite their best efforts, they would be driven back by superior Confederate forces. Now, it was my intention to go down there to explore that monument because it's not really visited a whole lot, but I am unable to find a path down to Rock Creek here because this is by far the tallest and thickest corn I have ever seen. So if you know how to get down there, please leave a comment and let me know, because when I come back, I'd really like to see that monument there. So what we're looking at here would have been Battery G of the 4th U.S. Artillery, and they were under the command of Lieutenant Bayard Wilkerson, who was just 19 at the time of the battle. Now, Bayard Wilkerson would have been commanding this battery from horseback when a Confederate shell would strike his right leg, leaving it mangled. Now, legend has it, Wilkerson would pull out a pocket knife and finish amputating his leg, which is absolutely insane to me. I don't know if you can imagine that, but you just got hit by a cannonball and you have enough sense to not only pull out a pocket knife, but then you amputate your own leg. Sadly though, Wilkerson would die later that night from his wounds here. Now, Bayard Wilkerson's father was Samuel Wilkerson, who was a correspondent for the New York Times. And he was traveling to Gettysburg when he heard news of his son had been wounded. On July 4th, he finally would locate his son's body here on a shallow grave after searching non-stop. Again, here's that human element of war that we need to remember. So, just ahead of Wilkerson's battery here, this position was coming under attack by men from Georgia and Louisiana under the command of John B. Gordon. And they would be coming from the north here. And to the left of Wilkerson's battery, the Union would have two regiments. You would have the 107th and 25th Ohio. Probably about 50 yards this way. Again, the corn's kind of in the way, but try and envision it with me. And Georgians, under the command of George Doles, would slam into the Ohioans here and drive them back. And on the right flank here of Wilkerson's battery, you would have the 75th Ohio and the 17th Connecticut here. And the problem with this salient is Barlow physically didn't have enough men to defend this position. Now, one of the units that took John B. Gordon's attack head on was the 153rd Pennsylvania, and they would have been positioned in front of Wilkerson's battery here. And it was in this general area where the 153rd held this position in the afternoon until the Corps was outflanked and retired when it took position along the lane at the foot of East Cemetery Hill. So this regiment would carry 24 officers and 545 men into battle, and one officer and 40 men would never leave this area, and 7 officers and 117 men would lie wounded, captured, or missing, and their total losses would be 211 just on these fields before us here. Now the Confederates would overrun this position, hitting Barlow from two sides here, from this direction and from that direction straight ahead. And while attempting to rally his men, Barlow would be wounded, and he would actually be left behind by his men. Now legend has it, the Confederate commander, John B. Gordon, would come across Barlow and give him a drink of water, and he would take him to a farm located on the other side of Rock Creek here called the Bender Farm. And we're going to see that here shortly. But the Union forces would be driven from Barlow's Knoll, and they would retreat back towards town in this direction. Now, they would make several counterattacks, but these counterattacks had little effect to slow the Confederates advancing on this position here. So Barlow himself would be wounded, and he would be captured by Confederate forces. And he would be taken here to the Josiah Benner Farm, where he would be cared for, and his wife would actually be allowed to stay with him. Now, when the Confederates would retreat from this location, they would leave Barlow behind, and it would take almost a full year for Barlow to recover from his injuries here. I believe he wouldn't return to active duty until April of 1864. So as you can see, there's some restoration process going on here at the Benner Farm, but this is the location. Good Lord, that was a big truck. This is the location where Francis Channing Barlow would be taken and cared for after his fatal salient here just through those trees. So now we're a little bit off the beaten path here in Gettysburg. We were just at Barlow's Knoll. Now we've moved north to a location called Jones Avenue. Now this is the area where the Confederates would have several artillery batteries set up, and they would be shelling Union soldiers on Barlow's Knoll and on Seminary Ridge. And if you need a reference point as to where this place is, it's directly across the street from the Gettysburg Area High School. This is the position of Jones's artillery battalion here for the Confederates, and he would have 4 Napoleons in this position. The sign reads, they reached this position with Early's division and immediately went into battery near this position, fired with effect on Howard's 11th Corps and the infantry retiring from Seminary Ridge. So from this position here, here's the other Napoleon, and I'll point you to the direction of Barlow's Knoll. So Barlow's Knoll is in this general direction. So the batteries would be set up here, and they'd begin shelling the Union positions here. Now obviously, as the Confederate infantry advanced, these batteries would cease firing, so they would not have friendly fire. And moving along Jones Avenue here, and this is the position of 4 3-inch rifles from Tanner's battery. And the sign reads as well, they would arrive at this location and begin shelling Union positions where the 11th Corps was, north and south of Rock Creek. So that's where the Union had those skirmishers. And here's a few more guns over here in this general area. So this is a pretty neat little detail that I almost missed that I want to share with you here. This battery right here, Tanner's battery, which consisted of 4 3-inch rifles, they expended almost 600 rounds over the 3 days here. So these 4 3-inch cannons would fire 600 rounds. Just imagine how loud that would have been, especially when you have, 50, 60, 70 pieces of artillery firing at the same time. So something interesting about Garber's battery is they would occupy this position and they wouldn't leave it. on July 2nd and July 3rd, they wouldn't really even be engaged. But they did suffer one wounded soldier here in this location. And this battery here, let's see if I can get my shadow in the way here, or out of the way. This battery here would shoot 106 rounds from 4 Napoleons. So we're at the end of Jones Avenue now, and this is the location of Green's battery of Jones Artillery Battalion, and he would have 2 10-pound Parrots and 2 3-inch rifles at this location. This is a pretty cool find. It's always good to get off the beaten path because there's so many stories here at Gettysburg just waiting to be told. And with Little Round Tap being closed right now for rehabilitation, hopefully we're taking advantage and visiting these lesser known sites here.